Okay. Sujin Malangi Zawaru Leba Dini Beba Dumayi Ruba Jimbo Demba Jingilo Nishini Be Dewi Nizandi Shigirka Dinshin Shigirne Yinzen Kundu Nimbo Limbelo Yujeme Bhagyawa Jingilo Luso Yawa Shuyi Chuburshin Yudu Jibe Shiwa Jambadam Shiwe Jasu Ludan Dimashin Kanda Linde Jishin Nawala Nyaba Nyembo Nyenin Nyembezo Tashin Tawa Nyam Bawada Yeso Tada Drubar Jebala Tadu Batan Demba Jingilo Chebe Minon Dunem Kungigo Ide Mirun Zimbe Punzoki Nimirine Darbe Dewala Tune Jembo Gyawa Jingilo Nanda Samba Deyi Jambayi Dendan Shishi Bayu Jimbuyi Sembe Zawa Zozor Dambala Juba Nibo Jebar Jingilo Rani Sisu Lungwa Jishindu Magyar Dawa Kingan Dendawa Nane Duwe Kyugyewe Chanju Senjo Jombar Jingilo Sensan Gekyon Nukun Namsumla Komba Mena Chanju Midubar Lebar Dune Geze Tombala Sumba Drakur Lobar Jingilo Lobe Yula Yanwa Jijing Yanda Dangla Sishin Shibai Shine Ladon Sundu Jawelon Yudu Gila Gewar Jingilo Tumon Lanjan Dudu Gabana Teba Gungi Shugu Turjete Esan Gewo Juno Dambata Dela Yudu Jubar Jingilo Tense Mudro Nani Drubeshi Nanda Tamse Tomba Sunwala Chama Mebe Neba Negurne Sotan Dute Sunwar Jingilo Teni Dute Nimbo Riniki Tenan Jishin Tone Sambayi Tunshin Nejo Shile Miewa Dambe Sushin Drubar Jingilo Detala Santa Shinyan Sushin Drube Drona Shapeshi China Nangi Bardu Chebeso Niwa Shiwa Jingi Laptuso Yawa Kundu Yanda Lama Dan Jame Chiki Pela Langshuji Saran Langi Yundin Razone Doche Shangi Goban Yurto Sangye Shudan Sogi Chanam La Janju Pardu Dani Gyasuchi Dagi Chutne Gibe Sanamgi Jola Benja Sangye Drubarsho Sangye Shudan Sogi Chanam La Janju Pardu Dani Gyasuchi Dagi Chutne Gibe Sanamgi Jola Benja Sangye Drubarsho Sangye Charan Soge Chanam La Janjo Pardu Dani Gyasuchi Dagi Chunje Gibe Sanangi Dola Penchar Sangye Druparsho Saji Budi Chuchi Metodan Prira Linjin Inde Yambadi Sangye Shindu Mikte Wargi Drogun Nanda Shinla Zawarsho Vidama Guru Rana Mandala Tayami. Okay. So, originally, when
talking about starting this class, I had thought maybe to had in mind to go over the bodhicitta instruction. So, and then I spoke to Andy. He said he was interested in maybe reading from Tsongkhapa's commentary to the Madhyamaka Avatar, which is basically right view in great detail. So those are kind of the two principal elements of Mahayana doctrine and practice, which is, you know, pretty much what I would like to spend time, you know, trying to become more experienced, understanding, maybe trying to develop some degree those knowledges. Then there are two, I mean, kind of from two sides. If you look at it from, you know, the whole overall Mahayana, so, you know, the Lama Tsongkhapa's system is sometimes referred to as Dongak Sungdel. Dongak Sungdel means combination of sutra and combining sutra and tantra and practicing them together. Right? Sung means a pair. Sungdel is like the phrase that's used to combine vipassana and shamatha practice, that they have to be practiced jointly. The same way Sutrayana and Mahayana in Tsongkhapa's system need to be also practiced jointly, in the sense that, you know, the Sutrayana form of Mahayana is kind of the foundation of the Tantra practice. So without it, without bodhicitta, without a correct view, right view, you know, the tantric practice is not going to be very effective or successful. Then that's one side of it. The other side of it is that, and this is what I wanted to kind of address, and which this is what this class to me is about. So I thought it'd be appropriate to kind of let you know my perspective, and it is that Mahayana, also even Sutrayana for Mahayana, bodhicitta or right view, both in fact, depend upon the fundamental, you know, called basic Buddhist doctrine of like Four Noble Truths. So if you look at the Lamrim teaching as a whole, so the middle instruction is meant to, associated with developing so-called renunciation. And, you know, there's a Lamrim presentation of that. And I certainly wouldn't want to, you know, say anything about Lamrim as it not being adequate or anything. But I think that this is my opinion, so you take it as you like. That renunciation, to really understand renunciation properly, you understand some of the doctrines, that Buddhist doctrines, which are not really emphasized, in my experience, all that much. Certainly not in the Lamrim, the way Lamrim is usually taught. So, for instance, subtle impermanence is not something that is usually addressed, and it's not really discussed much. I mean, maybe you can find references to it in the Lamrim, but it's not a distinct topic that's really examined in any kind of rigorous way. And even the notion of suffering. So the notion of suffering, noble truth of suffering. Usually in Lamrim, it's talked about as like in the context using phrases like samsara's defects or samsara's disadvantages. So that the Lamrim has 3 different formulations about suffering, 8 and 6 and then 3. And so the 3 types of suffering are the suffering of change, suffering of conditioned existence. And from my point of view, the suffering of conditioned existence is difficult to understand experientially, certainly, even conceptually, intellectually, and yet I maintain that. Well, anyway, I'm starting to digress. I don't want to spend too much time doing it. But my point, so for instance, the notion of right view, we get to the notion of right view, then, there's the selflessness of the person, selflessness of entities. And so, typically in Mahayana doctrine, the selflessness of entities is what is understood to be the teaching about emptiness. It just so happens that in the system of middle way school that was presented as part of the Lamrim instruction, describes selflessness of the person as also being the same kind of has the same status as the emptiness of entities. So there's similarly the emptiness of the individual, the emptiness of the personal self, and that's unique to so-called Prasangika school, or scholars like Chandrakirti and Shantideva and presumably Atisha, and then of course other people that are identified with that system. And there is a way of teaching selflessness of the person, which is not on a par with emptiness. So, and that is sort of the more conventional way to understand the selflessness of the person in all the other Buddhist schools except for so-called Prasangika or Chandrakirti scholars. So I think for many people that distinction is really hard to kind of understand in any kind of depth or detail, and yet it's really important. So this class is talking about the 4 chapters of Aryadeva's text are kind of meant to be a way of addressing sort of the four so-called four aspects of the truth of suffering, which are impermanence, suffering. The word is emptiness, but it's not the emptiness of Mahayana. It's a different meaning of being empty. Its term is the same, shunya, but it's not. And sometimes Hinayanists claim that, oh, we teach emptiness in Hinayana, but that's really I don't think that's accurate. And then the fourth aspect is selflessness. And so there is an epistemic sort of link within those four aspects. So you have to start with subtle impermanence. And then once you have some awareness of that, that kind of can be used to develop a correct understanding of the suffering of conditioned existence. So it's like taking understanding the impermanence, the subtle impermanence of our being, and that's really what we are. That's how we exist, and then kind of building onto that awareness of our subtle impermanence, a specific way of understanding how that is unsatisfactory in a very in a way that it was most of us are kind of oblivious to be honest. And then from that, from a proper understanding of that unsatisfactoriness or quote suffering, then you can make an inference to the fact that really understanding that what that suffering means, kind of almost kind of points to the idea that there's no governing entity that is able to have any control over your existence. So that's where this sort of this more basic form of selflessness, is sort of you're able to kind of get a feel for it, for lack of a better phrase. And so then, and that's even only part of it. I mean, that and that alone, those four aspects of the truth of suffering, are not sufficient. There are, what does he would say? They are necessary, but they are not sufficient for developing true renunciation. So in order to develop true renunciation, which really means aspiring to liberate yourself or free yourself from a samsara condition, it starts with understanding what that samsara condition really consists of, and then going from there to the second noble truth of what's the cause of that samsara existence, and then going to the third noble truth, recognizing the possibility of ending the cause of that suffering, and then the fourth noble truth is what's the kind of knowledge that is able to bring that about. Then you put that together and you can develop some kind of conviction about seeing that as a goal, and what's involved. Not only that the goal of liberation is possible, but sort of, at least in a fairly clear way, what it takes to kind of get there. And then, so you have the confidence, you have the faith. It is a faith that that exists and it's possible to attain it. It's possible for you to attain it, and then you develop that aspiration based on that faith. Then that is renunciation. Okay, so now, I mean, I've talked, even with that, just this brief discussion is still rather vague, because it's not really informed clearly by an understanding of subtle impermanence and the suffering of conditioned existence as being, that undesirable essence of samsaric existence. So we have to really have a pretty vivid recognition of that in a personal way, kind of see it in ourselves and feel it as being sort of something that we are not happy with. And that never really is meant to be jettisoned. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to get to is that unless you have that really sort of refined type of renunciation, something that is really informed by some kind of understanding and some kind of introspection and some kind of self-awareness in the sense of personal knowing kind of how you tick, if you want to put it that way, and then that's the kind of the starting point for you to want to develop bodhicitta. So it's like that's not enough. Renunciation is not enough, and so then you go from there by saying, well, you can't. I don't want to go into all of the things about how you shift from personal aspiration for your own liberation to altruism and bodhicitta. But the point is that that's an essential step in the process. So without it's kind of, I would put out there that without genuine renunciation, you're really not likely that you have a very what should I say, accurate or true form of bodhicitta. Because if you don't understand what's undesirable about samsaric existence in relation to yourself, then whatever pity or empathy or concern you develop for others, it's going to lack that same dimension to it. And if it lacks that dimension, it's not enough, right? Really, bodhicitta is not enough to want to, lead others to hinayana liberation. That's not enough, but it's definitely part and parcel and sort of the foundational part of bodhicitta. And then to lead them not only to liberation, but also beyond liberation. But so what I'm getting at is that these four topics, these four chapters, I'm addressing them as the kind of resource that you need in order to become a Mahayanist, in order to become a really serious Mahayanist. And so that's one side of it, that develop the bodhicitta. The other part of it, which is very interesting, is, and I have a passage that I'm waiting to get to at some point, actually a couple of them, where Chandrakirti talks about the necessity of cultivating these four aspects of the noble truth of suffering in order to, and he uses the word sort of, in order to loosen, in order to diminish your attachment, your mistaken attachment to a real personal self. And so, he's saying that the selflessness of the person, which is taught kind of as the basic Buddhist doctrine in the conventional way of understanding the Four Noble Truths, is as integral to developing right view, and so that's key also. So basically he's saying, if you want to get to the point where you're going to cultivate, in an effective and a meaningful way, emptiness, developing this understanding of subtle impermanence, suffering of conditioned existence, and this sort of kind of foundational way of understanding selflessness of the person are key. And there are two passages where, at least two passages, I think, where I see that. One is in Chandra's commentary to Nagarjuna's 60 verses on reasoning, which I remember reading and which I actually have with me. And then he says something similar in the Prasanapada, probably in the 18th chapter, I think, where it talks about the same thing about sort of loosening the attachment to us or a mistaken belief in a real self, not going far enough to actually perceive the deeper sense of selflessness of the person, much less selflessness of entities. So my point is, this topic, these 4 chapters, feed into and are essential, I believe, essential ways to, approach both bodhicitta and right view. And so kind of that's the reason I chose this text. So I put that out there. Okay, so with that, let's go back to the text. So we've gotten up to verse 11. And as I was reading through these verses, next series of verses, one thing struck me, which I think would be helpful if you really, if you spend any time on your own, kind of addressing or kind of really appreciate what the verses are saying. It's useful to look at the segues that Chandrakirti formulates as a lead-in to each verse. And what's interesting, I mean, it ties into Gyaltsabje's outline. His outline is, I believe, just basically taking the ideas that Chandrakirti puts out there as he introduces each verse, as sort of what is kind of how to understand what the aim of each verse is, and then he builds this outline based on that. But he, in his outline, in Gyaltsabje's outline, he's a little bit more abbreviated. So if you look at Chandrakirti's wording, not a lot longer, but he uses more vocabulary, and some of the terms that he uses are very, I think, telling. They give you sort of, they kind of prep you for each verse, and it's very interesting because I think if you just look at the verses themselves, you don't see what Chandrakirti is telling you, how to sort of put the whole chapter together. That's not to say, I'm not saying, that, everything that Chandrakirti says is, gospel, but it's very interesting, and it does tie all the verses together, and there's a sort of logical structure, even a narrative to the series of verses. That's very interesting. Okay, so with that, let's see. Maybe there's a couple of, I didn't read everything about chapter 10. I just wanted to give you a couple of typos in the Tibetan. On the last line on page 11, so it says, Anhayabu Gonggoiki Dröbar Nangla. I think Dröbar, maybe that's all right. Dröbar Nangla. Nangla Chöbe. Then it shouldn't be ta. It just that ta means horse, but it's actually ha. Chöbe ha. And so this is the second, example or illustrative example that's meant to tie into the verse. The last verse that we read, for those of you who maybe weren't here last time, subtle impermanence. This is the first verse that addressed subtle impermanence. And so the second example is Haibu Drogyok. Drogyok is the name of this. I'm not sure how to absolutely reconstruct the name of it, but this is some kind of worldly god who is faster, travels faster than any other deities, worldly deities. So, it is wrong. Haibu Drogyok means his movement, right? But understood speedy movement. And then it shouldn't be Barnang, it should be Barnang, the closed at the top. Barnang means in the sky, right? So the deities are able to move through the sky. Barnang la chebe hla. Barnang la chebe hla means then other deities have the ability to move through the sky. Gangi kyang mituba, but none of them are able to keep up with this particular deity known as Drogyok, swiftly traveling. And that's his name, or presumably the name. I'm not sure what the Sanskrit original is. What's her name? Karen Lang says it thinks it's the Ashvins, which are a pair of gods. I don't think it literally means Ashvins, but it could be wrong. So anyway, so the idea is, just as this god is faster than everybody else in traveling through the sky, our own impermanence is changing so fast that we don't keep up with it. We don't recognize it, and it's kind of beyond us, right? Tuba Shindu, so it says like that, right? That's making a simile. Gechik marjikpa. And this shouldn't have a second subject or side. That should be aojag pikujiga. Jik means perishing from moment to moment. Gechik marjikbe samba means the living, so-called living person, who literally are as beings, entity-wise, we are no more than collections of the moments of our mind, of different elements of our consciousness and emotional states, and the atoms, particles that make up our physical body, which are constituted of the four elements, right? So to say that we are alive is to say nothing more than that collection of the five skandhas lasts, we're alive only for that long, for an instant. There's no shorter period of time than that instantaneous change, impermanence, that our very being, is made up of. Minno. So that's kind of the story. I wasn't planning to read it out. I just wanted to show you the typos. Okay. All right, so that's the end of that verse. So now this next verse is also said to be discussing an element of subtle impermanence. This is related to this verse that just talked about our sense of being alive is really kind of mistaken in the sense that if we think of ourselves as persisting, existing, being alive through time, that's not so. We're only alive, quote, alive for an instant. And then a completely new set of five skandhas, replaces the previous one, and so on and so on and so on. And that's what it is to be alive, is this, these kind of snapshots of our being. As long as they stay together, when the mind and the body stays together, then that's what it means to be alive. Okay. So then we go from that verse where, he's saying, so to being attached to the idea of being alive is a mistake. That's kind of what this previous verse was, it's saying, because we're really not alive longer than for an instant. And so now, how does the next verse kind of respond to that? So if you look here, the description of this topic in Geshe-'s outline says, Yunrin was samba lagawa dan geba minderba gel. So it says, to be desirous or liking, and gawa literally means to be, to think favorably. To think favorably of living a long life, right? Now we have to take this back to the kind of the character, the kind of the archetypal person that Aryadeva is speaking to is this person who is attached to this life and who wants to avoid the idea of his or her mortality. And so part of that idea, part of that person's perspective is that such an individual doesn't want to die, and so in the back of their mind, they're hoping, it's kind of conscious or unconsciously, they're wishing for a nice long life, to live a good long life when you don't die. So this verse says to think of that favorably, and at the same time to think of old age unfavorably. That's kind of contradictory, because if you want to live for a long time, you're going to end up being old and decrepit. And so that's kind of, there's a certain sort of contradiction and confusion. So what it really means is that what we think to ourselves is when we think we want to live for a long time is, and we want to be healthy and useful and all of that. However, it doesn't work that way. If you live long, gradually you're going to become more and more feeble. So that idea of having this fantasy or this desire of wanting to live for a long time is a foolish and misguided attitude, because what you're really saying is you want to become a person who is old and quality of life is gone, because that's what's going to happen if you do live a long time. And so he says, so that's kind of the point here. So here he says, right? So wanting to live to be alive, quote alive, that's the key word for both of these verses. And not wanting to be, aged, everything that, an old person, has to deal with. Gelwa means those two things are, at odds with one another. Therefore, now it says, Gyunla chakpa mirikpa. Gyunla chakpa mikra. So it says, now that word gyun means a continuum. So that's what that's saying is, it's saying that, well, we may, even if you accept, which may not, but if you do accept the idea that we live only, that our being, our minds and our bodies only last from moment to moment, nevertheless, there is a continuity to that. There is some kind of link. There's a stream to it, and so even though we only, strictly speaking, live for that single instant, if we put together all of these moments, then they make a long, longer period of time, and that's what you're hoping for. Even if they are, series of moments, you want them to be a long series of moments. Okay, so now that's basically so what Geshe-'s outline says is it's inappropriate to be attached to that idea of a continuum, because the back end of that continuum is not very nice. right?
Hmm.
You're wanting the longevity, but you're ignoring what that entails, literally. So what I want to point out is, I'm not going to do it for every verse, but I will for this one, is how, let's see. So each of these just look at the wording if you have it. Do you guys have, any of you have the Tibetan for Chandrakirti? Okay, but you do have the translation? Karen Lang's translation? Some of you? No? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so where is that? This is on page. So what I'm getting at is how to. This is on page 122 if you have it. Okay, so the way Chandrakirti sets up each verse is he describes what this this misguided person might think, and then sort of as a way of trying to cling to this life and not thinking about one's mortality. So that secondary mental affliction of dwelling on the idea that you're not going to die, anytime soon. So this is do you have this written? Anybody have this written?
Oh no.
No, but that's gift subject. I'm talking about Chandrakirti. So here he says. So this way he says shena. Shena means if someone says. So this someone is the person who is sort of still clinging to this Michue Namatokpa, right? And no matter what Arya Deva says, no matter what each verse sort of presents as a teaching, the person still doesn't want to give it up. So it says, okay, Samba catching my yin means that even though the idea of being a living person is something that only is momentary, right, from one moment to the next, nevertheless, Detanayang, de gunmicheva, is something that is continuous. It's ongoing. It's a series. It's like a string of beads. Each moment is represented by one of the beads. And my life is the totality of those moments, not just each individual moment, right? And therefore, that, to the extent that that continuum is long, then I will have a long life. And that's what I hope for, right? So I'm not attached to the idea that I only last for a moment, at every in the the kind of the each instant of the present time, but I do think about this as something that continues, and my expectation is that that will be for a significant period of time, and therefore I should be. It's appropriate to use the word shemba is to be attached to that, to want that. Okay. So then he says, okay, so that is Chandrakirti's way of leading into the verse. Okay, so then the verse becomes. Then you see the verse as an answer to that idea, that mistaken idea. So he says, "Sure," and I says, "You, right? Sure, ring samba lagashing. You are one who wishes to live for a long time. You are one who wishes to have a long life, and at the same time, geni lakya migana. At the same time, you don't find it attractive. Gawa is to like, so you don't find it attractive. The idea of old age. You don't find that the old age is something that is undesirable, but yet you want something that is going to require you to experience what you don't want, right? Then he says, what kind of thinking is that? So in the English, we say, one of them says amazing, and the other one says, alas. So it's an exclamation. In Tibetan, it says Emma. Emma can mean wonder, right? In this case, it's not good wonder. It's sort of like, I can't believe that you think like that, right? Emma. Then he says, "Cheje" means cheje. Here you have to know how to split this. Cheje means your behavior, your attitude, that kind of perspective, your java, right? Your kind of conduct, right? Your life, your way of living. Then it says, Gyojala. Gyojala means persons of a like nature. Dambataburnam will, so only people who would agree with you are people who are as dumb as you, is basically what it's saying, right? Gyojala means people who are like you, who will think that attitude of wanting to live a long, happy life and enjoy yourself as much as possible. Then it says, Damba Dabur Nan. Okay, so then I believe this is, I think this is a phrase, and there's a word called Tarnang, right? There's a word Tarnang, which is in Tibetan typically, or I'm familiar with it as Tak Tarnang, right? I don't know if you know that phrase. Tak means sign, but it means a reason. Mm-hmm. And there's in Buddhist logic, there are two kinds of reasons. Tak Yangdak, which means a correct reason, and Tak Tarnang. So Tak Tarnang is a specious reason. Okay, so that what it literally means when that word that's being translated specious is it has some kind of semblance of being right? So that's why it says Tabur Nan. I believe that's Tarnang. Okay, and the Sanskrit word is Abhasa. Abhasa means it resembles. Okay, and it resembles in the sense that it isn't really that, but it kind of seems like that. And in this case, it's modifying Damba. Damba. And Damba is can be an adjective or it can be a noun. It's the same word as like Dambe Chur, Sad Dharma, right? Sad is a prefix Sat. Sat means true, genuine, right? Pure, and then Dharma, so it's a holy Dharma, right? So there's also Sat Purusha. Sat Purusha means then a Kibudamba means a true spiritual being. So here that word, I believe here that Damba means a person. Sat. And Sat can mean it on its own. It can mean a knowledgeable person, or a wise person even. But it says that behavior of yours can only be considered wise behavior. It can only appear to be wise behavior to those people who are like you, right? So it says that way of thinking is really mindless, right? Is what he's saying. He's mocking that kind of thing, right? Now, it's a little bit different from what you see here, right? He says here, not too far, your conduct seems right to a person like you. But I think it's more personal than that. I'm going to say, your conduct is this, false conduct or specious conduct, but it appears to be the conduct of a wise person only to, ignorant people who are like you. So that's my take on the verse. A little bit different from the English translation, although the idea is kind of the same. Okay. Now there's a phrase in here. Okay, so let's read the commentary. It's pretty easy. Right. So here, the idea here is the idea of the continuum of those moments. Now that's really, in Buddhism, the nominal self, right? So, the kind of central doctrine of Buddhism is there's no real self that persists through time, and that is soul, and also is a governing agent that has control over one's life. So nevertheless, there is a nominal person, a nominal self. So what do Buddhists identify as a nominal person? And typically, it will be some aspect of the five skandhas. Typically, it will be the continuum of the mind, right? Is the person, because the continuum of the mind is something that existed before this life, right? Your physical body is something that didn't exist before this life, your coarse physical body, but your mind did. And your mind, after this life ends, you'll discard this rough physical body, but your mind continuum, if you haven't abandoned mental afflictions, will continue on, and that's the basis for identifying a person nominally. So you say Kumbu Yun, right? So and so there's some sense in, and you have to build up by way, not to get too philosophical, but there's the notion of personal identity. So that's a term that's familiar in Western philosophy, and it's applicable to Buddhism. So the notion of personal identity has to fit that Buddhist model. So if that continuum of related, moments of the mind continuum they have some sort of causal link that kind of ties them together. So that gives them some kind of nominal unity, right? And so that's how we can say that's the same person when they were a child as when the person became an adult, and the name still applies. So anyway, that idea, which is a Buddhist idea, is very much at play in this verse, sort of a subtext of the verse. But of course, Aryadeva is not really talking about the Buddhist theory of the self so much as he's showing some kind of misguided idea about, that element of our genuine element of our being from the Buddhist perspective, but sort of misappropriating it and building this idea of wanting to live a long continuum, and that's okay, and to have an attachment to that, and sort of forego any concern about future lives is, unwarranted. Okay, so then he says, all right. So I'll read the commentary, and there's a little bit of kind of building on what's in this verse in terms of vocabulary. So he says, "Lo chinchi lo pa shik de." So he says, "Sure." It says, "You" is the the person being addressed in the verse, and so then Geshe just says, the "you" there means a person who has a mistaken mind. Lo chinchi lo pa, right? The lo chinchi lo pa is, in a sense, mitakwa la takwa zemba, right? Someone who's still viewing that continuum of the elements of the five skandhas as some real entity. Say yuring to somebody like gashing, right? He says because this part is just repeating the verse. There's only two syllables in there. Say yuring to somebody means living, a life, living for a life that is long. But then here it says the old age, not wanting or disliking the prospect of old age, is, then he says, Chakarwa Nyarma Soktan Dembe Gemba. Then what comes at the tail end of that continuum, which is white hair and wrinkles, etc., means then a body that's weakened. I mean, this is alluding to the suffering of old age, right? Which is mainly like a weakening of the faculties and so on. You don't want that part of it, but that's kind of inevitable. Then he says, here there's there's a zek missing. It says it's not jesu zeb, it's jesu zewe. Jesu zewe means out of compassion, the person expresses this, wonderment, like out of concern for how misguided this kind of thinking is. So he says, in your, out of your concern, then this exclamation Emma comes out. Oh, poor you, pity you. Kirky look, and here it says kirky, right? So that's good, right? Is to be read together, right? Kirky, and then he adds look means your misguided behavior, your misguided way of life. Dini damba mimbe kyo. Then it says persons like you. So then how does he describe persons like you? Persons who are like you are persons who are not Dhamma, right? Who are not true, who are not wise, who are not knowledgeable Dharma persons. Only those kind of persons would think that your behavior is it represents that of a wise person, right? So, for them, they form this misguided notion of your being wise, right? Keva namnalim, then it says true knowledgeable persons, right? Keva is like panditas, right? Knowledgeable person. Keva namnani min, right? It's not damba for wise persons. Truly wise persons, your behavior is not, it's not good. Keva mindabe, if you want to avoid old age, or you dislike the idea of old age, then it's you shouldn't have attachment for a long continuum. And then so this is actually kind of nice, and it sort of almost has it should be recognizable to everybody. This is kind of a generational thing, where he says, "Perna kemot du shukbe kembo shigla," means then in a park, right? There's an old person in a park. You can imagine yourself walking in a park and coming across an old person, and then having young people look at that old person and say to that person, you're really unattractive, right? You're how ugly are you, right? Little do they know that that's what's waiting for them. So they laugh at such an old person. But those young people who are mocking this old person, they also want to live for a long time. So if they want to live for a long time, they're laughing at themselves, right? Because they will end up the same way, right? Okay. So that's that verse, right? So this is saying, this is an attempt to sort of evade the implications of subtle impermanence, right? And it basically is kind of like shutting your eyes to that impermanence and kind of deluding yourself into thinking that, there's some reality to the continuum of those moments. Okay, so that's it. There are, if you're steeped in Buddhist ideas, you can reflect like that. And I think the real point there is that a very real human quality of, at every stage in your life, even if you're old, you still cling to the idea that you want to keep on living. And that idea of keeping on living is you have this idea, and you don't state it, but it's kind of taken for granted that period of time during which you keep on living, should have a certain quality to it that you're going to enjoy. But the thing is, it's kind of like you come into the end of the rope, right? And as you do, it's really a misguided way of thinking. So rather than live in that fantasy, face the fact that, death could come anytime, and you ought to be focused on what's not relating to this life. Okay, it's my attempt to sort of bring it back to the Lama. All right. Okay, now, now, this next series of verses are also, I think, interesting, and I think for some it might be a little challenging. So this next group of verses, 5 or 6, or up to I think verse 19, 20 or so, is talking about grief that is felt at the death of a near relative. The one example that's given is one's own child, one's own son or daughter. Right? And so, what could be more, kind of, in the secular sense, what could be more traumatic than to lose a child? Now, that's one element of it, right? Of course, that's true. But I think that there's also another subtext of this, which comes at the very end of the verse, is the fact that in Buddhism, the ideal, especially, in the earlier times, I think even today for that matter, but the ideal for the Buddhist is to abandon the secular life and go forth into the homeless state, right? Mm-hmm. So even Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi and the what is it, Mahayana Alankara Shastra, right? Mahayana Alankara Shastra. Which are Mahayanic. In the Mahayana context, in the Mahayana domain, it is acknowledged that a householder, right, is a legitimate form of practitioner. You can be a bodhisattva and not be an ordained celibate monk or nun. However, there's a however, and it's in the Mahayana Alankara. It states very, straightforwardly, and Asanga does as well, Bodhisattva Bhumi. The monk's life is much more suited to even the Mahayana lifestyle. So, given that point, of course in Hinayana the same is true. The ideal is for an individual to abandon householder state, to go forth into the home state. And as that comes at the very end of the chapter, that point is sort of addressed. And that's socially at odds with the Vedic tradition, right? The Vedic tradition is the 4 stages of life, right? Mm-hmm. And the 4 stages of life end with moksha, right? What is it? Kama, Artha, Dharma, moksha, right? So Kama is the first stage of enjoyment. Artha is the second stage of, providing material for yourself. Dharma is the stage of social responsibility. And moksha doesn't come until the end. And so in the traditional Indian milieu, you do not sort of go into, live in the forest, be a forest dweller, and devote yourself to, achieving salvation, your ultimate salvation, until you fulfilled your responsibility to society and your family you've done all your familial duties, and not before. But for Buddhists, not the case. Buddhists, look at what Buddha Shakyamuni himself did. Buddha Shakyamuni was married, had a child, and walked out on him, right? And the followers are encouraged to enter the order. So there is in the Vinaya. I'm not an expert on Vinaya, but there is this, I believe it's actually a rule, which is say how young can you be to enter the order. And there's this. I believe this came about because of the slaughter of the Shakyas. And so I think it was Ananda's two nephews. Where is you know that story?
I can't recall. I think you're right. I can't recall something, but I think it's a different name.
Yeah. So Ananda's two nephews, I don't know, maybe the parents were killed, they were orphaned. I think that's right. I don't want to embellish it, but I believe so. They showed up at some place where the Buddha and Ananda was as Buddha's attendant, and they were quite young. And so the question was, well, what to do with them? These are young boys, probably, maybe not even teenagers, maybe 9, 10, something quite young. I don't know their exact, I don't remember. And so the question arises, well, could they enter the order? And they could, so they had to turn to the Buddha to get some, guidance. And so the way I understand it, the rule is, if there's a crow in the tree, do they have enough sort of like, what would you call it? Some kind
Presence.
of some kind of presence, or sort of,
Stature almost.
Yeah,
Height.
to be, no, voice wise.
Voice.
Can they say something to scare those crows away? Can they yell at those crows, and the crows will be startled and will fly away? If they won't, if they don't think that those children are in any way kind of a threat to them, then they're too young. But if they can scare crows away, then they can enter the order. So that's putting it at a pretty young age that they can enter. So that's the Buddhist ideal. And so in other words, at any time in your life, no matter what your family situation is, if how do they say it? There's, I'm not making light of it, but there's a thing, in Christianity, to feel the calling, right? So if you feel motivated to devote yourself to the spiritual life, go for it. You're free to do it. I think there are other rules, like saying below a certain age, if your parents are living, they have to, give them permission. But otherwise, it's encouraged. Okay. So what that means is there is a kind of sentiment in these verses that family life is a burden and is antithetical to spiritual development. And that's going to come through in these verses by saying you should not be attached to your family members. Right? And it's described in terms of the death of your own child here. And so, but it's, that's, I think, for kind of, modern Westerners, that's not an idea that we typically, are familiar with. And we probably have to think about it before we would, agree with it. It might be something that we kind of feel uncomfortable with, even to some extent, And if so, that's indicative of kind of attachment that one can have for his or her, family members, whether it's your parents or your relatives or, your immediate family or whatever, all of that. And so there is a second, he says there is a secondary mental affliction, amara vitarka, right? Amara vitarka means that thought that you're not going to die. There's also jnati vitarka. Jnati is Tibetan is nidu. Nidu means close, near relations, kinsmen. Right? So vitarka means to be thinking about, having this kind of sense of kinship and feeling a closeness and that needing some kind of attachment. I'll give you another example that is really, I think is quite striking. It's in the Namdro Lakchang, in the Kadampas, and the Kadampas were pretty strict. There is their teaching called Pugnorchu. Pugi Norbu, Norbu. Chu means there are 10 jewels that are relate to the that puk means that not in the near term, but that are of value in the long term. So in the sense of for your dharma, and one of them involves not allowing your family in any way to deter you from pursuing spiritual dharma. And so I think it's one of the final ones, but you can look up. I don't remember off the top of my head. That topic, that teaching, there's a specific text called Pugnorchu. It's usually in verse form. There's some, there are kind of very brief commentaries. And Pabongaram, which is Lamrim Namdro Lakchang, let me see, which chapter? I think it might be this chapter. It is. I think it's the chapter on Chiwamitako, on impermanence, where he talks about it. He addresses those 10 points. And so anyway, I'm a little bit, what should I say, talking too much, but it's relevant to this idea of, not feeling any obligation to maintain ties with your family because they are just a source of, fetters, and they hold you back. Okay, that's a subtext for this. The main point is just the way Ardeva talks about it here is more directly to this idea of impermanence, and it's saying you mourn the death of someone else, but you ignore your own mortality. And he's saying, he uses language, he's saying, you should be mourning your own mortality. You haven't died yet, but you're going to, and you should be concerned about that. And you should, the idea of mourning should be that sense of, you should have grief about the idea that you might die without having accomplished anything spiritually meaningful with your life. And so that's, quote, a form of grief or mourning that you should have, rather than grieving at the death of a family member. And of course, if you have a strong sense of this kind of impermanence, this rough impermanence of your mortality, then the death of a family member or the death of anyone should be something that is never unexpected. And as it is unexpected, and this is the interesting part, is there should be a certain, not indifference, not caring, but a sense of equanimity about it. That it's not something wrong that happened. It's natural. And really, to the extent that you feel it about yourself, it should come as no surprise when you observe it among your family members. And therefore, for Buddhists, now I'm really getting a little bit off, but one of the things that Buddhists say, or Tibetan Buddhists say, is when a family member dies, you shouldn't go ballistic. You shouldn't wail and scream, because that's not good for the person who's passed away. There should be a certain calmness all of that kind of ties in with it. Now, for Westerners, that's kind of new territory, I think. What should I say? In terms of spiritual values, but at least give it some thought, and maybe it will seem reasonable. Okay, so so it says. Now this verse again. It's really hard to pinpoint. Kyorang chila, pinpoint how to take certain words. So it says, Kyorang, it means you, right? Chi, it means death. But that does, in this case, I think if you look at Chandrakirti's commentary, how he glosses that word here, that's just chi, it's a derivative of the word for death, and it really means mortal person. Okay, so it says Kyorang chila nyangin na. So it looks like it's a conditional, right? It's like if you are, feel sorrow about your own mortality, but it doesn't really mean if. It's just that it's while you should have sorrow about your own mortality, but don't, right? When you should have mortality, when you should feel a sense of anguish about your own mortality, but you don't, why then do you feel it for someone like your child or then another? It could be another family member, right? Why do you feel the sorrow for a child who may have died, but you don't, when you should feel it about yourself? When you don't feel it about yourself is implied. Now, this is really interesting. This part, also, I think the two translators didn't quite get the real sort of the poetic, the word kind of nuance that's conveyed here. So it says rangi. Rangi means yourself. This is the second half of the verse, right? Then it says joja. Now joja, if you read it for just straight Tibetan, it's like the future part of sutta or something. It is to be done, right? Or it could be should be done. And here, what it should be done is joa usually means to criticize or to scold, even, to speak abusively. There's a word. So it's actually related to. There are four. I'm sorry, I'm really all over the place today. So there's something called Gejong Shi. Do you know that term? Gejong means Shramana. Shramana is a generic term for any spiritual ascetic. And so all the Buddhas, monks and nuns, would do the more specific term bhikshu, bhikshuni, they can be called Shramanas, right? Buddha is called Mahashramana, right? The great ascetic. Right? So then there's a Gejong du Jebe Che Shi. So there's four qualities that cause one to be a genuine spiritual ascetic, right? Says, now I got to quote them, I don't remember all four of them. So they are Shela Layam Shemicha. Shela Layam Shemicha. And I think that's this one, Shewa. Shewa means to speak, to be spoken to abusively. Right? When spoken to abusively, you should not speak, you should not return in kind. You should just remain quiet. That's it. That word shewa is not joa, but spelling wise, but I think it comes from the same Sanskrit root. Right? Trala Layan Termija, also Trala Layan Termija is another one. So when someone expresses anger to you, right, don't speak, don't return it, don't respond to anger with anger. Don't, when you're struck, if someone hits you, don't return some physical violence. And what's the fourth one? I forget the fourth one. You can look it up. So I think one of them is that if spoken to abusively, right, if someone speaks harshly to you, criticizes you, tells you you're stupid or you did something really bad, and typically people feel affronted, right, indignant, and say, right, well, if I'm that, then you're this, right? To not do that. So here, that's typically the way this word would be understood. Joja, to be. So saying you should be, you are the one who should be, but it doesn't mean spoken of critically. I believe because the same word, the same Sanskrit root, the verb, can mean to cry out. So it has the notion of something verbal. I think it's a mean to cry out, as in when people are mourning and they cry out, lamenting, right, wailing. You are the one who should be wailed at. You are the one who should be wailed at, right? Meaning you should be wailing at yourself. But then mabo means you are a speaker, literally. And yet you are doing the wailing about somebody else, right? You, who ought to feel some sense of anguish towards yourself, and yet you are expressing this, lament towards a lost relative. Right? Why is this not? Why should this not be ridiculed, or why should this not be derided? So saying, the idea is that when someone in your family dies, we're supposed to go. We're supposed to show our grief. We're supposed to express our our sense of concern for the person who passed away. But he's saying, and yet here we are, mortals ourselves, and we're doing this in such a way that we are kind of oblivious to our own mortality as we do this. So is that not foolish? So it's something that you have to sort of think about a little bit, because I think there's all of that sort of worldview, Buddhist worldview, that is part and parcel of what this verse is saying, which is to say, your own mortality is more germane. It's something that you should be more concerned about than the natural passing of other relatives. If you ignore your own mortality and just show it towards other people, that's sort of ridiculous, he's saying, right? So again, this is an example here. We didn't read the. Did we read the? Actually, we didn't read the outline part. So how does Getzabje talk about it? He says, Rani chiwe jikpa le mandrol shindu means Rani means yourself. Chiwe jikpa means the peril of death. Le mandrol shindu means that's the present continuous. While you are still not free from, or you have not gone beyond the peril of death yourself, mandrol shindu. Dei meaning misembar. Dei meaning misembar means without reflecting on the disadvantages of ignoring your own mortality, right? What are the disadvantages? We read that for one section from Lamri Chem, was very beautiful. It says the worldly person is that it fits a typical worldly person, while they're like that, the only time that you feel any grief about a person's death is when it's somebody else. He says that's from the point of view of your own spirituality, that is not good, not inappropriate, foolish, ridiculous, right? So this whole that topic has a brief statement, which is this verse, and then there's a series that follows it. Gevership, right? Okay, so Dortebatang Gelengi Gevership. Gelen means the person who the verse is being addressed to, this person who is feeling grief at the loss of a child, for example, might, object to that criticism and say, yeah, but. And so the next series of verses are responses to any possible, objections that someone might raise, to say, but yeah, it's appropriate to feel that way, right? It's not bad to feel grief. The point is not that it's not that it's a bad thing to feel grief about another person's death. The point is that if you're oblivious to your own mortality as you do so, that's inappropriate. And that's what he says. Right? Oh, yeah. Okay, so yeah. Now, here I said read Chandrakirti's introduction to this verse because it's very informative. Okay, so this verse, this is what he says. Daniki tungel rikve xianqiwana xianda kyang didabu kyoke no xie gyoadang demba chago. That's it. Okay, so he says, this is how he starts it out. He says, therefore, because you know your own suffering, right? Being aware of your own suffering, when someone else dies, you should reflect. Oh, other persons are just like this. Means have the same nature. Means I should feel. Gyoa means a sort of lack of ease, right? This sense of alarm, sense of being upset. Right? I should do that. Kanshi kashi ni mindarba yin merki teta nayang de ni chitagula yerbar nyangi gyugua teta nangla yerba mayindu namba. So he says, whoever, so this is how he describes it. Whoever does not want to experience old age and death, right? The previous source, this is how it leads in. The previous source was addressing the idea of old age, right? Saying you want to live a long life, but you don't want to experience the qualities of being old. So he says, so if you recognize that, if you recognize both the undesirability of old age and death, nevertheless, Deni Chitabula Yerbar Nyangingi Gyurgyur Teta Rama Yovaino. He says, nevertheless, Chandrakirti is saying, you only kind of apply that kind of concern or that kind of apprehension when it comes to somebody else, not to yourself, right? And so this is the verse. Then he says, so here, this is kind of a little bit the way Chandrakirti sort of fleshes out the verse. Here's one of the things he says. So first of all, for the Chiwa, it says, Dani Kerang Chila, right? So he says about Chiwa, he says, Chiwe Chöjin. Chiwe Chöjin means someone who is subject to death. So that Chiwa means a mortal person. You are a mortal person, therefore you should feel concerned about that. Dani Chiwe Chöjin Yidu Gyurba De, right? So it says, given that you are a mortal person, okay, and this is now here he puts a little more detail onto it. He says, such a person, Chawa Macheba Nikichir. Chawa Macheba. There's a phrase, Chawa Cheba, right? So arhats are described as Kritya Kurta. Kritya means what needs to be done. Kurta, they have accomplished it. They have done what needs to be done. What needs to be done is the mental fictions need to be abandoned, right? So they are Chawa Cheba. Kurbor. There's a whole series of epithets for one day
vows. Yeah.
Okay, so you're mortal and you are Chawa Macheba Nikichir. You have not completed, you have not done what needs to be done. You're still a samsaric being. So therefore, any grief that you might feel is to yourself because you are still subject to death, right? And the consequences of not having lived well. Bulasope dundu nyangin char mirikso. So he says you shouldn't be as concerned about your child. And now you say, well, why is that? Okay. Then that brings in the notion of karma, right? So the notion of karma is what is then attaches to each person individually. So as whatever you might feel, whatever concern you might feel, the person, even relative, right? Whatever happens to them, it's on them. They have to bear the consequences of the way they may or may not have lived their lives. So whatever whatever sort of all parents, especially parents, I laugh because I am this way. You feel about your own child. Oh my God, how is this person, my child, gonna figure out how to live their life the way I think they should, right? But that's foolish. Right? I mean, you can try, you can sort of say a few things, but at some point, you have to stand back and say, okay, it's up to you now. So here, that's kind of at play here as well. So you haven't done what you need to do. Therefore, that's what you should be focused on. You can do your best for your other family members based on whatever knowledge you may or may not have. But at some point, you gotta let things go. So shouldn't have that. You shouldn't feel that sort of helplessness and anguish that you feel at the loss of a child. Then he says, Rani chidale debe, right? He says, if you have transcended the Lord of Death, if you happen to have transcended the Lord of Death, if you are an Arhat, if you are a Buddha, right? We ran over who transcends the Lord of Death. Then they say, chida baba le semna chawarik. Then it's okay. Then he says, Shenla chida baba. Then you don't have to worry about yourself anymore because you've transcended any bad consequences of your mortality, right? So then you can have the luxury of looking at someone else who is maybe still subject to the Lord of Death and therefore might be worthy of your concern, right? So chidal baba semna chawarina. If you are no different, if they are subject to the Lord of Death, and you as well are just as subject to the Lord of Death, then Shendala Mawapor Guru says, then for you to lament another person's death and be oblivious to your own mortality, then you are behaving foolishly, right? Right? So how does he say this? How is that not worthy of ridicule? Right? If you look at the verses, not every single verse, but a good number of the verses, they have this kind of, punch to them. Saying to the, sosokyo, right, the ordinary samsaric being, how foolish you are. Don't be that way. Don't be so foolish, right? So this one ends like that. Okay. Yeah. Gashi deva. Yeah. Gashi minda ba yunga de ni bu la yoba nyang di kul tu ta ran la yoba mimbe busa chiwala nang chaba rikso shena. He said. So this is saying, well, my child, they're subject to old age and death. That is lamentable, right? He says. Then this verse is saying that, oh yeah, okay, maybe it only he gives an extreme example. He says the only time that you can rightly, express the lamentable quality of another person's mortality is when you're no longer subject to it. Because to ignore your own mortality is, okay, I'm now beating a dead horse. All right, okay. So here he spells it out. You who are still under the power of the Lord of Death. Debatan Shindu means still subject to bad deeds, still tainted by your own bad deeds. Debatan Shindu Chiwa. If you are facing death in that state, that's you should feel a sense of anguish about that. You should be, wailing about that prospect. Instead, then this is the practice. Chiwa Jesu Jamba is Marana in the sutras, right? Marana Smrti in Sanskrit, Marana Sati in Pali, right? To be mindful of your death,
right.
to be aware of, and to be. I think the word Jamba, you should. Jamba is sorry. So Jamba is one of the mental factors. In Buddhist psychology, so the second, third, fourth, and fifth of the 5 skandhas are primarily mental in nature, right? The second and the third are single mental factors. The last one, fifth one, is consciousness. And the fourth skandha is, there's actually 2 types of entities in it, but there's included in that are all the other mental qualities. The word is chaita, means something related to the mind. So I mean something that accompanies the mind. Those are usually called Tsumbar Dembe, Samjung. So Tsumbar Dembe means they are companions, so to speak. That consciousness is made up of awareness and then these attending sort of mental states, which can occur in a number of different varieties. So one group, this is in Asanga's formulation. Asanga's formulation is the higher Mahayana doctrine. There are 51 such mental factors, and they're grouped according to different categories. The first one is called Kundro-nga. Kundro-nga means the 5 ever-present mental factors. And then among those is one is so-called recollection, smriti. And this is a very important mental factor in terms of practice. So let's see. Actually, Jamba is not one of the ever-present ones. It's one of the object-specific ones. There are 5 that occur with all moments of consciousness, and then there's a second group of 5 that are active in certain circumstances. And the way they're active is based on your experience. Okay, so then this second group includes the word that is used for aspiration, right? Like for then that's merba, right? And that quality is the main attribute of renunciation. And in the same way, also the aspiration to achieve enlightenment of bodhicitta is the form of, Dumba. Yeah, Dumba. Yeah. So then one of these is then the one that I'm getting to here is called Smrti. Smrti in Tibetan Jamba. And it comes from the same root as the verb, which means to remember. So there's some sort of, some of these terms are translated differently by different people. So typically this one is, especially in terms of practice, is often described as mindfulness. So Chiwa Jamba would be mindfulness of death. Now, in a general sense, you can say that the word is appropriate, but I don't know that the word mindfulness, because the word mindfulness has this other kind of contemporary, usage that refers to some kind of, meditative practice. So, and that's one of the reasons that I typically don't translate it as mindfulness. I translate it as recollection. Now, people, I've had people say, somebody wrote a review of the translation that I made, that they didn't like the idea of recollection because it implies sort of kind of retrieving something from your memory. And recollection, or this word, jamba, smrti, doesn't refer to that. And that's true. But I do think, in a way, well, anyway, I don't want to have that debate here.
In Christian practice, that word recollection is actually used precisely the way you
well, this idea of repetitive,
No. I mean, in the sense of somebody abiding with a sort of sense of.
That's a kind of recollection.
Well,
good.
Yeah.
So I'm on the same page with that. But anyway, here is Vasubandhu's description of it, which is pretty much the same as Asanga. Vasubandhu's following Asanga says, what is recollection? What is smrti? Right? He says, samstutya vastuni. Samstutya vastuni means it has to be an object that you have some experience with, some familiarity. You have to have experienced something in order to be able to remember, right? If you have no experience with something, there's no way that you can hold it in your consciousness. So it has to be something that you have some familiarity with or some awareness of. Now, in the case of Dharma, this is critical because what it means is you have to have gotten some instruction. You have to have gotten some kind of explanation. And that explanation is not just, verbal in nature. It's meant to be a kind of introduction, a sort of giving you a description of a certain kind of experiential quality, which then you use those words to kind of look for that meaning in your own experience, right? So then that's what samstutya vastuni means, right? Samstutya vastuni, right? So that kind of familiar object. So in this case, this notion of the doctrine about death, right? In the Lamrim is that death is certain, that time of death is uncertain, and that only Dharma is of any value when you face death. So those three, when you reflect on those three topics, you develop some kind of understanding, right? That's what you become familiar with. So samstutya vastuni, asampramosha. Asampramosha is the key word. So the Sanskrit word in Tibetan it says mijeva. Mijeva literally means not to forget. But the sampramosha means it means to, in a sense, to sort of have that familiarity, that awareness, and sort of escape your conscious mind. So to become, I got the translation.
The avoidance of inattentiveness towards a familiar object.
Okay, so inattentiveness, right? That is by when I say inattentiveness, it means that you've lost sight of that understanding. It's drifted away from your conscious mind. Okay, so here, the avoidance of that inattentiveness. So it means the power of this mental quality is it holds that understanding that you have, that you gain through your study and your learning, and it keeps it in the forefront of your conscious mind. Okay, that's what recollection is meant to do. Right? In the Lamrim, it's very important in one-pointed meditation. So there's another factor that goes with it, which is called shishin. Shishin means to sort of take stock of where your mind is at any given moment. So you combine those two, right? That kind of vigilance and recollection, and that's how you practice kind of reflective meditation. So here, the idea is that Gemba has, if you have a strong awareness, a strong understanding of some subject, then this recollection has the ability to sort of keep hold of it, to maintain it in your conscious mind. So even though it's, then he says, it's a kind of mental discourse. That's an interesting phrase. It's kind of like you're talking to yourself in your own mind. You're using the Dharma understanding sort of to remind yourself, right, of what kind of state of awareness you are trying to maintain. Okay, so the idea is then in this case we're talking about your mortality, that death could come at any moment, right? So the extreme example in the sutra was that you have the awareness you could die literally between the time that you exhale and the time that you inhale. It could come that quickly, and so you hope that you have the opportunity to continue to think, at least. And if you happen to live beyond one breath, then the same thing for the next breath. So that kind of heightened understanding about your mortality is what it means to maintain this recollection, cultivate this sense of recollection about your mortality. Now, it's not, I think it's not practical to think that that's all you would do, right? But what you want to do, and then there's a Tibetan phrase which talks about si simba. Si simba means like when you cultivate a motivation. When you cultivate a motivation, the initial exercise is to elicit the kind of awareness that you would like to have, and be conscious of. Then you develop it as strongly as you can, right? And then having done so, then you set about whatever Dharma activity you are planning to engage in. And so what this phrase "si simba" means, "si simba" means to be that exercise will color your mind. "Si" means to kind of like paint, and so that will sort of your mind will be infused with that quality of mindfulness of your mortality. And so even though you're not consciously sitting there, I could die anyone, I could die anyone. You don't have to do that. But if you do that as an exercise, and then you have a plan for what you intend to do next, if you do that exercise intently enough, the force of having done so will sort of remain in your mind, and it will color your awareness and inform it as you go about your practice. So that's kind of.
I'm sorry to ask you to go back a little, but you've been talking about.
Talking about this term of recollection.
Well,
yeah.
Before that, you were talking about how we can grieve someone else's life, but don't think about our own mortality.
Typically, that's what people do.
Right, and there was a New Yorker cartoon some years ago of a child sitting by the bedside of his dying grandfather.
Okay.
And he said to him, "Grandpa, how do you spell deathbed?" It keeps coming to mind. The child couldn't think about his own mortality, which we don't expect.
Right. Yeah. So he was trying to. He was doing the same thing that the verse is saying. Okay. So he says, "Ramchio Jesu Jamba Yellow Bor." Right. Yellow Bor means to abandon the need to cultivate that awareness. Right? So even though you ought to be, apprehensive, concerned, even lamenting the prospect of your death before, you've been able to, purify yourself or absolve yourself of your bad deeds, then instead of doing that, you sort of ignore it. You ignore the need to develop that kind of awareness. And Buddha Sopanam Shiwe Chirchi. Then why do you? So it's like saying, you're expressing this grief for another person who's undergoing, their death, but you're doing it in a way where you are ignoring. Okay, so now here, this is interesting because this shows Yetzabje doesn't understand the word joja. I told you that word joja means to lament. You are properly an object to lament.
Mm.
He takes it in the more like common notion of to criticize or scold, right?
Mhm.
And it's because I think I'm right, but I'm projecting what I believe the original Sanskrit word was, and looking in the dictionary, it tells me there is a meaning of that, which means to cry out and even to lament and wail. So he's not taking it that way. He's saying, he's saying, when you yourself are an object of verbal abuse by the Lord of Death, right? But it's not the agent of this verb to be abused is not the Lord of Death, it's you yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You should be lamenting your own mortality, not you are an object to be criticized or scorned by the Lord of Death, right? Okay, I mean it's the play on the word lament and grief that is the key to this verse, and he's sort of turning it back on yourself, right? So while you are someone who is being scorned by the Lord of Death, meaning you are still subject to the Lord of Death, right? You ignore that. You abandon any thoughts of that condition. And and you instead, you are a voicer. Mawapo means you are someone who gives a voice. It doesn't mean speaker, but it means in the sense of you are letting out some kind of verbal, statement, which is a form of grief at someone else's death, right? How could this not be scorned? Right? Literally, it's in the negative, right? How is this not to be scorned? Right? It definitely is deserving of scorn. You should strive to reflect on your own death. And you should strive to practice recollection of your own death. Okay, so we'll skip that story. Oh, we went over the breakdown. Okay, so, are you making faces? Hey, you keep me young, Bali. Okay, so we'll take 5, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to go on. Okay, so I'm skipping the story, the two examples, or I don't know if there's two or however John said, James. It's pretty easy. Okay. So now, the next section is a more extensive discussion of this same point relating to one's family, right? Or feeling grief about the death of a family member while not being concerned about your own mortality. Okay, so Gelling Gewership. So Gelling means so responding to objection. Gelling means responding to objection. Bumma Jiva. Now these are kind of probably ideas that are not at first reading, they might strike you as a little bit odd and not the way you kind of think that you think. So, but you have to sort of try to look for kind of the message. Try to figure out what the message is. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to give you some typos. There's in the first line on page 13. It says "Nyangin Jeba." There's missing "jengbu" there, right at the very end. You see that? Yeah. And then on line 3. Okay, now we're starting this outline part. Line 3 says "Jiktemba Shingi Mor Bu," and then it says it looks like Bu Shing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually Bu Shiwa. So the death of a child. Okay, so right now we're going to go through them one by one. So this one says Umadribar Parodu Songwe Nyangin Ripagapa. So this is saying Gapa means to refute, right? To refute the idea that it's appropriate or right to grieve. Nyangin cheva means to grieve, right? Nyangin is a noun, right? Nyangin is grief. So nyangin cheva is the verb, right? To grieve, to make grief, right? So to refute the idea that it's right to grieve because, right? Some way it shows reason, right? Because your child, right, has gone, literally means died, right? Because they died, because they went to the far side. Went to the far side means went to the next life, right? They went to the next life without asking you if they could leave, right? So Buma Jiva means he didn't ask you. So what does that mean, right? Okay, but that's the way it's that kind of wording is in the verse. Okay, so we'll skip down because all of these are just the other headings for the outline. And the first one has two parts to it, right? Buma Jiva Parol du Song and Yangin Cherupa Kapala Ni. Means the direct formulation of that point, right? And the second one is Rani Mombar Seki. Rani Mombar Se means it's just a case of your confusion or ignorance, because in fact, implicitly, the child did ask. Döngi means indirectly. Döngi is an idiom which means indirectly. Döngi, draw jiva. They asked permission to go. All right. So the first one is you're grieving, refuting that that it's appropriate to grieve because they left without asking permission. Now, I don't know whether it's I'm making too much of it, but the idea of I remember I was in graduate school and I had a professor who was Japanese and so East Asia, and he was suggesting that in East Asia, where there is this term. I'm not a scholar of Chinese or Far Eastern culture at all. But there is this term, and I don't know what the Chinese term is, but it's translated as filial piety. Maybe many of you have heard it, right? So this is an idea that in Eastern Asia, the children revere the parents, right, to a great extent. So this professor maintained that there wasn't anything like that in India. I don't think that's true at all. I think this idea of revering one's parents is huge in Indian culture. When you meet your parents, you touch their feet, or touch the ground that they walk on. So the idea is that the parent. I think part of what's being expressed in this verse is you're the parent. I won't be patriarchal. I won't say you're the father. You're the parent, although it probably is more patriarchal than I'd like to admit. And the idea is that the children, owe you a kind of respect where they do your bidding, right? If you ask them to do something, they are obliged to do it. And the corollary of that is that oftentimes they shouldn't do something without first asking your permission. So that idea is kind of at play in this verse as well. So, but it's not being addressed in a straightforward way. It's sort of alluding to that in the context of this recollection of death. And again, I think that maybe does hark back to the notion of family life is really. I was thinking about it this morning, and that the Buddhist ideal is to abandon family life and to go forth as a homeless ascetic, right? And to live in the forest with others who've done the same, and to lead this very kind of singular, I don't want to say lonely, but by yourself kind of spiritual career. And the question is, it might arise, so I'm putting this out there as an idea. It might arise, we say, well, this is maybe true in Hinayana, because in the Hinayana tradition, you're more concerned about your own salvation, and so let's say you don't care about others, you practice the four immeasurables, but it's acceptable to kind of, if not abandon, sort of separate yourself from your family. They say, well, the Mahayanists don't do that. Mahayanists, they live as householders, they take care of their families, and they care about others. So this idea is not appropriate or not the same in Mahayana practice. So my answer to that is it is in Tsongkhapa makes a point of it, and he draws, I think, on the Bodhisattva Bhumi, and there is a Bodhisattva vow, is Ranichipo Drogarsem. Ranichipo Drogarsem is it's a line from the 20 verses on the Bodhisattva vow by the author is who's the author? Chandra Gomi, is a poet, Buddhist poet. So the 20 verses on the Bodhisattva vow is really a versified summary of a Sangha's chapter, morality chapter in the Bodhisattva Bhumi. And so a lot of the verses are addressing the secondary transgressions, the 46 secondary transgressions, 40 some in, I think, 45, 46, that are addressed. And so, Ranichi Sem is the secondary vow which says that you, because you are a Mahayanist, you shouldn't think that since you're concerned about achieving enlightenment, and enlightenment in the Mahayana, in the Sutra and Mahayana context, is countless lifetimes. It doesn't matter so much that you haven't gotten rid of all your mental afflictions. Because after all, if you get rid of your mental afflictions, right, you will then achieve Hinayana and Nirvana. If you achieve Hinayana and Nirvana, you're going to abandon sentient beings because you have to become enlightened. It's not enough to just achieve Hinayana and Nirvana. So it's okay if you don't show great concern about, subduing your mental afflictions. Because your real purpose as a bodhisattva is to get out there in the world and do good and help people. So it's saying, so Rani Chipur Gerber Sem, as the transgression, is for the bodhisattva to think it's okay for me to remain in samsara in such a way that I don't have to worry that much about my mental afflictions because I'm a Mahayanist and I'm seeking enlightenment. So that Asanga formulates that is a transgression for a bodhisattva. And then if you read his Asanga's description of that transgression, in it, David here, he says, So here I translate this as regarding samsara with complacence, meaning you're not concerned about the fact that samsara is this turbulent place, and you're gonna find yourself, in situations where there's stress and difficulty, and it's okay if you lose your temper once in a while because you're really motivated to try and help people. So here, this is the Bodhisattva boom. Any Bodhisattva who holds the following view or professes it to others commits an offense and a transgression, and he or she acquires an afflicted offense. Quote, a Bodhisattva, this is the wrong idea. A Bodhisattva should not abide with an attitude that delights in nirvana. Delights in nirvana means thinking about how soon can I achieve my nirvana in which I eliminate my mental affliction. He or she should not fear the root or secondary mental afflictions, and he or she should not be striving exclusively to separate his or her mind from them. So it shouldn't be, focused mainly or mostly on controlling your mind and not allowing mental afflictions to arise. For enlightenment must be pursued by a bodhisattva while remaining in samsara for 3 spans of time that are each made up of a countless number of couples. Quote, if you have that thought and you think that's valid, just having that thought and behaving in a way that conforms to that thought is a transgression of the Bodhisattva vows. Okay, that's the formulation that Asanga makes. He says, and then he explains, a Bodhisattva should engender delight toward nirvana, and aversion for the root and secondary mental afflictions that is 1 trillion times greater than the delight that a listener means a shravaka, a Hinayana practitioner, should develop towards the root or secondary mental afflictions. This is because a listener is dedicated to the pursuit of his or her own welfare. And so you can, isolate yourself and just worry about your own mind. But a bodhisattva is dedicated to the welfare of all sentient beings. So it is true that a bodhisattva has to engage with others. That's part of it. Thus, a bodhisattva must attain a state of self-discipline in which his or her mind remains so free of affliction that even though not an arahat, right? You're not an arahat, because if you were, you would have abandoned your mental affliction. Even though not an arahat, he or she can interact with entities that have the potential to cause the outflows to arise. So it means as a bodhisattva, you have to be able to engage in situations which for the normal, quote, normal person, the non-bodhisattva, would most likely inflame your mental afflictions, right? You must be able to do so in a way where they don't affect you. And so you wouldn't be able to do that unless your self-discipline were that much stronger. Here, as he says here, 1 trillion times stronger even than a follower of the Hinayana path. Even though not in heart, he can interact with entities that have the potential to cause outflows, right, in such a manner that the unafflicted state of mind which he or she is able to maintain, which he or she possesses, is even superior to that of an arhat. So that's saying you must, as a bodhisattva. Okay, so how can you do that? How would you be able to do that as a householder, right? Or a monk, for that matter. I mean, even as a monk or a nun, you still are, as a bodhisattva, you still are being more engaged with society and other persons, developing others, than say a Hinayana might be. All the more so if you're a householder. So what that means is, my point is, the only way that you could do that correctly is if you develop a degree of self-discipline, self-control, right? In which you could interact in such a way that you would not become you're agitated in any way. You would retain complete equanimity. And the only way you could do that is if you cultivated an awareness of the mental afflictions and their disadvantages, as well as the unsatisfactoriness of samsaric existence, and to maintain a disdain for samsaric existence, and yet remain in samsara. So Tsongkhapa says in the Lamrim Choma, he says, that is the marvel of the Bodhisattva. That the Bodhisattva is as aware of the unsatisfactoriness of samsaric existence as the Hinayana practitioner is, and despite that, still engages. But not only engages like in a futile way, or in a, quote, not suicidal, but in a way where you are throwing yourself into turmoil because you can't control your mind. You have to prepare yourself in such a way that you're able to do it effectively, right? So the point that I'm saying is, the only way that you can actually do that is if you develop very profound renunciation. So renunciation is the view that nirvana is indeed a very desirable state to achieve, right? So it says he should delight in nirvana more than the arahat delights in nirvana, and he or she should have, a concern about the mental affliction greater. So the only way you can do that is if you have really strong renunciation. Not only strong renunciation, the real key is you also have to have a very profound awareness of emptiness. And that's what allows the bodhisattva to be, like in Lojong, you're able to be like the peacock that eats poison. So anyway, the point that I'm making is that it is entirely appropriate for the Mahayanas to develop, a very strong aversion for samsara, and concerned about some sorry, as evidenced by that meant that precept. Bodhisattva. Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about a parent, right? So the parent is meant to be revered by his or her child, and so the verse. So from that frame, from that perspective here, the verse says, "Gangse" means when it's a case that, okay. It says. So the word, the first half of the verse is, "Where did your child come from?" It's saying, right? It's underlying the statement, but the statement overtly is saying, "Gashik, Kante Gashik." Gashik means someone, but what it's so this means anyone, right? Anyone who might have become your son. The word used son could be child, any child, right? Then it says, that child, that person who became your son, Rani Burgyur, right, became your son. Then here it says, Macholoa. Choloa means to request, as in to invite, to ask for something. Typically, Choloa is like what beggars do, is they ask for some charity or something. So here, what you're requesting, right, that Joab is requesting, is the person who became your son is not somebody that you saw in the distance before they became your son, and you said to them, "Hey, I'm calling you to become my son," right? Rather, they arrived, right? And where they came from, maybe Buddha knows, but you certainly don't, right? They came from somewhere, right? So, Gangse Kashik Macholowa Renyu Burgyur. So that's how they came, right? They came without having been requested to come by you. You didn't ask them to come and be your son, and then they agreed to do so. So therefore, Dedro means when that person, so actually I think it goes together. Draw jua machiava means go without having asked. Mm-hmm. So when they leave, that means when they die, when they leave this life, they don't go in such a way that they come to you and ask permission to leave, right? Dendro jua machiava. That's the nature of things, right? When they go, suddenly or unexpectedly, or maybe they don't even know themselves they're going to die. So they don't ask your permission to leave. They didn't come because you invited them to come and be your son. Therefore, since when it's the case that they were not invited to become your child, in that instance, that's it. That's means when that's the case, why is it not improper? Right? Why is it not improper? It's double negative, right? I'm sorry. It's not a what do you call it?
Double negative.
It's not an interrogative. It's not a what do you call it?
Huh?
No, it's not
Question.
yeah, but there's a kind of question.
Rhetorical.
It's not a rhetorical
Yeah.
question. Hey, thank you. Okay. It's not a question. It's just a double negative, right? Mm-hmm. So saying, when you didn't ask them to come and be your child, then why is it not? I'm sorry, making it a question. Therefore, it is not improper. It is not improper for them to leave without having asked permission to do so. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that sounds a little bit unusual, right?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to sort of figure out what this is really referring to. So I think part of the idea is there's a kind of suffering which is called jelwe tungel. Jelwa means separation, right? So there's midupa tantreva. Midupa means something that is not attractive or not wanted, and to have that befall you, that's a form of suffering. And similarly, dupa means something that is dear to you, something that you like, tantrelwa, then that also is a form of suffering, to lose or to be separated from. And one form of separation is death. So when a dear child, somebody that you feel they have attachment to, right, happens to die before you do, as we all know, that can be a form of grief. So this idea like, oh, it's unfair, right? Why did they leave? Why did they leave? I didn't have a chance to, settle everything. He says, I think there's one place in which he says, Malemba, he says that typically with your children, they are recipients of your inheritance, right? So you did not give them their inheritance before they left, right? It's kind of meaning that they sort of left unexpectedly. So, all right. So the wording is like that. Let's read the commentary and see if it sort of becomes a little clearer. So here he says, machoror means without having been requested, right? So requested means, for example, you do not say to someone, be my son, right? Become my son. Gi means it's a verb to do, right? But it's a form of the verb to do, here it means be. Machoror, without having been requested to be your son, was not a conscious thing. Children are conceived the way they're conceived, but the particular child that you conceived sort of comes out of the cosmos from somewhere, right? There, Rangi, he says, how did that person become your child? Rangi lewangi means his or her own karma. By the power of his or her own karma, Raniki Purgyurba, they became your child by their own karma. It's not as though you looked for them and then invited them, right? So it's through their own karma that they came. So in that case, right, because of that, so therefore when they leave, right, so you should not expect that if they are going to die, right, that before they die, they should come to you, right? So they should come to you and say, is it okay, Dad or Mom? Is it okay if I go now? I think I'm going to die. So should I have your permission to die? So they came by the power of their own karma, and the implication is, and they also leave the same way, right? By the power of their own karma, their lifespan is exhausted, then they pass away and they're going to go wherever karma sends them, right? So therefore, the idea that somehow they have, acted in a way that is, unfair or, inappropriate to you as a parent, and so you're saying, oh, my child, I lost my child. Why did they leave so early, or something like that, right? To say it's not right for you to think that. It's not wrong for them to leave without having asked your permission to do so. That's the way death happens, right? Then here he says, Droongiga rangar jeba de chuni yimbe This is an interesting phrase. Rangarchoba. There are where are my notes? I think I have them down here. So, yeah. Yeah, here they are. So in where this is verse 13, right? Yeah. So Chalikirti's commentary has Rangel Duchoba. Rangel means Rang means one's own. Gel means sort of, I'm not sure. Rangel, as if one has the own power to act, right? Rangel Duchoba. So the one sense of it is that it is something that you do under your own will, right? Freely, right? But I don't think that that's the meaning. So here it says, Droong Nika, right? Droong Nika means becoming, means birth, and going means death. Both of them are here it says Rangar Choba. Now Rangar means as one pleases. That we do it at our pleasure, right? That's not true either, because as the commentary says, we are taking birth under the control of karma and mental fiction, and saying both of them are the same, right? So how is that term here to be correctly rendered, right? So I think the idea is something more along the lines of there's another possibility that these terms could have is that it means spontaneously, accidentally, or by chance. I don't think by chance is accurate. One way is possibly unexpectedly, right? Or suddenly, right? Suddenly, right? In other words, when they're born, they come, where they come from, we do not know. In fact, in the commentary, it says both of those things. It says when a child is born to us, we don't know where they were in their previous life. We don't know where they came from. And when they die, we don't know where they're going to end up in their next life. So I think that Rangar Choba has this idea of more of a sense of the unexpected, and possibly also then without our knowledge, without our understanding. So, but it's an odd term, and so the translator, if you look, what word do they use here? I don't think it really makes sense, right? Here he says, she says arbitrarily, right? So arbitrarily doesn't, to me, it doesn't really. Arbitrarily means sort of as if someone just feels like it, right, without reason, right? I don't think that that's really so at one's discretion, right? So I'm thinking that the word is more a sense of suddenly, and then or there's a word that means unexpectedly, and also refers to someone who comes without having been expected, like a stranger, like someone who just sort of showed up on your door, right? Was unforeseen, unexpected, someone that sort of showed up. I think the idea is something more like that. Right? So their appearance is like that, right? It was unexpected. This particular individual was not expected, right? You didn't request them to come. They just came, and then you discovered who they were. as they, developed and became their own person. And when they leave, they also leave. Then, in this case, the idea being the fact that they didn't ask permission to leave suggests that they left sort of, for you unexpectedly. You did not. And typically, we think of a child as someone who doesn't die before the parent. Okay? So anyway, that Rangachoba is a little bit requires some speculation to properly understand. I think the other translation says it is his fate. Rangedu
Rangjung Yeshe has the Rankar Shakpa to mean to rest naturally. Mean like it just happened, they happen naturally.
Okay, all right, that's a possibility. Yeah. Rangachoba de Chenyibe, but the way the commentary says is de Chenyin means it means the birth and the death. The nature of birth and death is that it is something that we don't have control over, maybe.
Yeah.
So perhaps something like that, right? Yimbe, so even the persons themselves don't have any control over, much less the parent. So I says, anyway, so this is kind of, as I sit here, I can tell that for some of you, this is sort of a puzzler. It turns on this idea of requesting and asking permission, right? You didn't request for this person, you didn't plan specifically for this person to become your child. So therefore, why should you expect that their departure should happen in such a way that they ask your permission?
I mean, just by looking at
Maybe it has something to do with that we have some sort of authority, almost ownership over our children, something like that. And now that's just something that popped into my head, but it's touching on this idea of family relations and how parents think of their children.
I'm wondering, could it not mean something like going and coming happen? And this is sort of, he uses the term at their own pleasure, like poetically, like they happen by themselves according to their own laws. We have nothing to do with their.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, it may be a reference to their coming and going is governed by their own karma.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And that we have no say in that. So we didn't have any say in who it was that we became our child. So why should we have any say in their departure?
Yeah.
Something. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. That sounds reasonable. But I think that I definitely, in this series of verses, one of the key ideas is this. Obviously, the main one is this thing about your own mortality. But I think a secondary one here is attachment to family relations.
Well, and it's definitely referring to the thing you started with, that it's really their karma.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to feel bad for them. Like, it's their lot to have gone through this process. It's not like under your control.
Oh yeah. There's, I don't know. We're running short of time. There's one that comes at the end. I don't want to give a spoiler, but what did I say? It says something. It just reminded me of it. Where is it? Okay, we'll leave it for when we get there. So let's read the commentary on it, and I think that's about all we'll have time to do. This is just the story. We went through the explanation. So here's the illustration, and these illustrations, I have to say that although in some ways they're want to say they're not. I don't want to suggest that they're irrelevant, but they're sort of something extra, right? In a way, they're on point. And there's sometimes they sound really odd, but if you read them the way they're meant to be read, they're sort of stories, but they really parallel what the verse is saying. So here it says, "Benna Brumeshik." So here it's saying, a certain woman, "Loburdu Wongne." All right, so she came suddenly, right? And she came into a garden, right? Gemotel means like a park or a garden. And she arrived like who knows from where, right? Unexpectedly. And the person who encountered her in the park, then by whatever happenstance, Chumar Kelanla, that person took her as a wife. Chumar Kelan, he accepted her as his wife, right? So this is gender specific. Chuma is a wife. Chumar Kelanla, they gane ombayang misheso, but he had no idea where she came from. Okay, so that's the idea that when you have a child, their karmic past is a mystery to you, right? Du chi means at some later time. De majibar means that here that it's in the edition that I have, it's written as this, but that spelling is to write. It's past tense to write. It's definitely not, doesn't mean that. So I put in brackets, quite ask, right? So it should be G, not G, right? That's what that's doing, okay? So later, without asking, right? Manjiba Sawana, then she left, just without asking permission and without letting anybody know. She just took off. They do means at that time when she left, then the husband missing his wife felt grief, grieved. Oh, my dear wife. Where did she go? I know not where. Right? Della, then, so there he is grieving. At his lost wife, who left and didn't die. She just took off. Della Shengi, then somebody else, maybe his friend or a neighbor or somebody says to him, do you know where she came from? Do you know where she, what village did she come from? Right? When his friend asked him, this wife that you're pining for, by the way, where was she from anyway? And he says to her, I don't know. Right? So it means, these people that come into our lives and become our family members, it's by karmic happenstance, you say, right? So we shouldn't be crazy when they leave, right? That's what this is Ona. He says, Ona deshindu de droayang tetanja. So it says Nadanja should be Dedanja, right? Ona deshindu is the guy still talking to him. Well, if you don't know where she came from, and that didn't, affect you or bother you, it says, now she's left. It's the same thing. You don't know where she left, so don't be upset, right? You say, why do you grieve? You don't know where she came from, so you don't know where she went. It's the same thing, right? So it's kind of meant sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but not totally tongue-in-cheek, right? Jebatar, right? So like this story, so we should not grieve at the passing of those who came from we know not where and went to we also know not where. So it's, it's just life, right? And we should, as much as possible, remain, even-minded, right? Remain maintain equanimity. That is the Buddhist real, appropriate attitude towards death is one of equanimity. Not indifferent, not I couldn't care less, but even-minded. And so here, that idea is again, Nyaya Miriksha. So here this was, you shouldn't feel somehow that it was inappropriate that they left and now you've been abandoned and it was unfair. Why did this happen? All those why me things, right? Okay, so maybe that good place to stop rather than running on.
Art,
Yes, ma'am.
can I just, we were talking before, I seem to think of everything after you go to your next topic, but.
Yeah, that's fine.
About filial piety,
Yes.
and I happen to be reading something from Confucius.
Yeah.
The superior man bends his attention to what is radical, that being established, all practical courses naturally grow up. Filial piety and fraternal submission, are they not the root of all benevolent actions?
Yeah. So that's the I guess that's the classic Chinese sort of principle. But there are perhaps not expressed in quite exactly the same words. I translated Nagarjuna's wrote a kind of a didactic text, which he wrote two that were written in the form of supposedly letters to different kings, and one of them he talks about the fact that how the relationship I want you to have towards one's parents. In the Bodhisattva Bhumi, and that they're to be highly revered. In the Bodhisattva Bhumi, in the chapter on generosity, right? So the Bodhisattva, is supposed to be able to carry out, radical forms of sacrifice your own body, right? Is the kind of the extreme example. But one of the things, and one of the things that is said, it's perfectly acceptable to give away your children. It's mentioned that your children can be, now it doesn't, under certain circumstances, I suppose, that you can part with your children. But he says in the same chapter about one's parents that under no circumstances can you ever abandon your parents. He says you should carry them around on your head, by which he means that you should revere them. And the idea being that they gave you life, and due to their existence that you had this opportunity to be born as a human being, and that is an obligation that is. As I look in the bodhicitta, Marsheva means to come to see all human beings, all sentient beings, rather, as one's mother. Or actually, the original quote, it doesn't limit it to your mother. It says your mother, your father, your teacher, and so forth.
What about your siblings? Would be included.
You mean your relation to your siblings?
Yes.
Well, nothing jumps into mind. Comes to mind immediately. Spouse. But typically, it was like the idea is that there are three sort of relationships: someone who's older than you, someone who's younger than you, and someone who's your same age. And so, in terms of gender, certainly in the idea of sexual attraction is kind of the extreme or the quintessential form of attachment is sexual attraction.
What's
And-
the name of the book you translated? I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
A letter to a friend.
Letter
There are it's been translated by others as well. The one that I translated happens to be a commentary include a commentary by Rindawa, who was Sakya Lama. Anyway, so there is this notion that, of course, it's reciprocal, same thing for women, but in a way, from the male point of view, all older women are to be viewed as your mother. All similarly aged women are to be viewed like your sister, and all younger children are to be viewed like your own daughter, and vice versa. And that's meant to to be the relationship which is least problematic and the one which allows you to interact in a in a positive way, right? So that's the only thing that I can think of.
So, letter to a friend, I'm sorry,
Nagarjuna's letter, I think it's the way it's called. Nagarjuna's letter.
could you also please tell me the text of Chandrakirti that you were referring to earlier?
It is his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, of which the first 4 chapters are translated by Karen Lang in this book, 4 Illusions. Right? As far as I know, I believe there's another guy named a well-known scholar in the field. I think his name is Tom Tillemans. There's a book which he did. I think it was maybe part of his doctoral thesis, in which he translated some of the later chapters, 12 and 13, I believe, something like that. And he consulted the maybe a Chinese a Chinese version. I don't know if there's a Chinese version of Chandrakirti's text, but there's certainly a Chinese version of Aryadeva's text. Anything else? Okay. Well, I kind of I put a lot out there. So I hope I didn't distract you too much.
Talking to it.
Sometimes, I guess the spirit moves you, right? That was a joke.
Yeah.
But I find the text very inspiring. I mean, I think, as I was, Andy at the beginning of the class, Aryadeva is a very early text, and, he's a contemporary, he was a junior student of Nagarjuna himself, but it's unusual in that, of course, the latter part of the text does talk a lot about emptiness. But the first part of the text is very much in the vein of conduct. Right? So, in the Lamrim, there's some formulations say tawa and jerba. Tawa means the view. Well, what is the correct view? So the view, generally, you look to Madhyamika scholars as the ones who are, source of understanding the Pachasamhita Sutras, for instance. And then jerba is bodhisattva conduct. Typically, the asanga is, through Maitreya is sort of the, the ideal, scholar. But there are certain, Madhyamika scholars who do address bodhisattva conduct. Shantideva, of course, his Shiksha Samuchaya, I think, is a fantastic resource, and maybe not enough attention is paid to that text. But this one also, it's very interesting. So we'll end it there. So. Dani
Rindu bele zonini, Kata yamba kaji zabade, Lomi mari ki tondro wanam, Nam jenge we wambo da gyuji, Termasun be zera kunduyam, Jambe yangi zewe jesune, Dembe rimba kunsalangi cho, Nene drube gana nye jejo, Rangi jishin dokbe langi ne, Shudra zewe danbe tapteki, Jowe yigi mamba sejene, Yewe demba yurin zingyujik, Demba rinchen jogi makyamang, Yagyanyamba yube chodeni, Ninje jembu yirab yubayi, Pende derda sewarje barsho, Seje gawe mejun tin lele, Ledru janju langirim begyan, Landu namgi ila pederjing, Gawe zeba rindu kyong yujik, Lam zan drube tungen drub jeshing, Gegen se je mi dan mi min kun, Zera kundu gawe nakwa yi, Nam da lam dan drawar ma gyujik, Dan ze te pa chola chu chu chu, Sushin drupla zumba de ze, Tunde nam gi dak tu dro che shing, Drashi gyatso chogun kyab yu chi. Di ke wo wan zanam ye shi so so shing, Sanam ye shi le jong wen, Tamba gu nin do par sho.
So, 나도 정말 다른데 기기부 인 싸고래.